So the market and crypto hang by a thread tomorrow as we wait two things. The first, obviously, the inflation CPI numbers, and the second, the somewhat of a result of the China-US trade talks. So let's go over these one by one. First, the CPI numbers. The headline target rate is 2.4, and if it's 2.3 or lower, we're probably going to pump. If it's 2.5 or higher, we're probably going to dump. Simple as that. If it's like below 2.3, Powell might consider cutting rates in June. That might happen next week, but most likely that's not going to happen. The market has essentially priced in 0% chance of a rate cut, and we're going to have to look forward to July. Obviously, like Powell is waiting until we get some reports of if the tariffs have actually affected inflation or not. Trump does keep basically putting them forth and then withdrawing them, then putting them forth again. So it's causing a lot of uncertainty. And a lot of the shipments with those tariffs on them didn't really start hitting until the end of May. So this inflation report should actually be pretty good because most of that hadn't really taken effect. We'll start seeing some of the effects probably like in the June report that comes up in July. But the market's basically priced in a 0% chance of a Fed rate cut for the next FOMC meeting. They're looking at the one at the end of July, hoping for a rate cut. So I don't expect that to actually impact the market that much. Now, the other big thing I want to talk about is the China-US trade talks. They've seemed to have come to some kind of conclusion. If you look at this article on CNBC, they have some like Geneva Convention consensus after the second day of London talks. But the thing is, there's a lot of things they haven't agreed on, and they still have to get the sign off from their respective presidents, Trump and Xi. And of course, last time they kind of agreed to some sort of a framework, each side accused the other of bad faith. So this might happen again this time, although there has been some concessions. So the US and China have reached consensus on trade. Representatives from both sides said after high-level talks in London, the negotiations will now seek approval on the framework from U.S. and Chinese presidents before implementing it. The talks follow a breakthrough trade agreement reached in mid-May that paused new tariffs for 90 days. So that was the 145% tariffs and the 125% tariffs or 15 or whatever tariffs that China had on the U.S. So they said, we have reached a framework to implement the Geneva Consensus and the call between the two presidents. Of course, many people have actually reported on this. And of course, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping did actually speak by phone last week, stabilizing what had become a fraught relationship with both countries accusing each other of violating the Geneva Trade Agreement. So they're going back to implementing that trade agreement, but I'm not really sure how well it's going to work this time because, in a few weeks, they could just be accusing each other of violating the trade agreement again. So this all has to take place before, obviously, the 90-day stuff expires. And of course, the 90-day stuff expires in August. We also have the 90-day expiration of the EU stuff in July. And I don't really see the EU really working with the US as well. Trump has said on his part that essentially both the EU and China have been very, very hard to actually work with, mainly because they're not giving him what he actually wants. And of course, he's kind of used to getting his way, and he's not really good at compromising or anything like that. So I don't know if anything's actually going to come into effect. Obviously, the EU trade agreement stuff or the 90-day pause ends next month. So if he doesn't extend that, we have tariffs coming in from that angle as well, which will actually introduce more economic uncertainty. Lutnick said U.S. Trade Rep Jamieson Greer will head back to Washington, D.C. to make sure the president approves the deal outlined. If she agrees, then we will implement the framework. So I think the most important part of this framework is not really getting rid of the tariffs. It's with certain resources that both countries want. So China obviously has restricted imports on U.S. of rare earth metals that the U.S. obviously wants, and that will be resolved in the framework implementation. And of course, in return, the U.S. has basically relaxed restrictions on sales of advanced tech to China in the recent weeks, and that needs Beijing's approval. So essentially, they give us rare earths, we give them advanced chips and tech, and we're back exactly to where we started before all this nonsense actually began. So we essentially had trade tensions that had negative progress, and then we made some progress, and now we're essentially back to neutral. So like this deal is taped together by two sides leverage over each other, not common principles or shared interests, said Scott Kennedy, senior advisor and trustee in the Chinese Business and Economics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. The chances for further stops and starts is quite high. So he's saying like because they're just using leverage against each other, it's very, very likely that this will start again. And I tend to agree with him. I don't think either side really trusts the other one. And of course, both sides are going to try to sell this to their people as a win. So, while Chinese state media had been quick to announce Xi's call with Trump last week, Beijing's official mouthpieces were conspicuously silent more than an hour later after Lutnick's comments, except for a lower-profile mention citing Vice Commerce Minister Li as saying that the talks helped build bilateral trust. So obviously, they're all playing around each other. And I don't think unless you sign the exact same agreement with China that we had before, which I'm perfectly fine with, by the way, you're really not going to get that much of a new deal. So on Tuesday, local time in London, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told reporters he was headed back to the U.S. in order to testify before Congress. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, the head negotiator on trade talks with the U.S., and Chinese Minister of Commerce Wang Wintao also participated in this week's discussions. So I think people don't really know what to make about this. If they agree to the Geneva Accords, I expect a little bump, but not very much, because that's kind of like getting us back to where we were in May, except a month time has actually passed, and now we only have 2 months before Tariff Armageddon Day hits again. And with neither side really trusting each other, and basically both sides just using leverage to get what they want from the other side, I see like, little tits and tats, but I don't really see, I don't really see these tariffs really being backed off on in any way. And I think Xi Jinping is just like okay to wait this administration out, or see like what kind of discontent there is brewing in the United States, because he honestly can just suppress discontent in China. And I don't think we'll really be able to get what we want from this trade war until just people get tired if prices actually start rising once again. So the framework is basically like, I would say just like an easy agreement right now to basically get rare earths flowing one way and chips flowing the other way. And it could definitely stop at any time, because, if either side becomes unhappy about something or either side decides they want a small win, they could just halt it, but that will cause halts from the other side as well. So this is going to drag on for quite a while. And like I said, I don't think 60 days is enough. I think they'll eventually have to extend that freeze period until they actually can get something. Now, these trade deals can actually take months or even years to actually work out. Especially like, if Donald Trump wants like something that he can sell as a victory to the States, I don't think China is going to give that to him all that much. And you'll see from Chinese media that like if they make a deal, they'll try to sell it as a victory for the Chinese side as well. And if you see like those two sides being disparately different, then you know that essentially nothing was actually done. And we basically have the exact same trade deal as before, which I think is what's going to happen. There'll be some BS stuffed in there, so it makes it a little bit different. But overall, like, we do actually need some kind of agreement to get the economic turmoil to actually shut down in the United States for crypto to actually pump. So the best thing that can actually happen tomorrow is like there's a framework, and they've kind of agreed to kind of like a stoppage in the in the trade war, and they'll get like new negotiations up. And of course, CPI comes in lower than expected. My guess is CPI is going to be 2.4 or 2.3, which is perfectly fine. But I really don't think in the next few days we're going to get too much of this Geneva trade consensus. And I think in a few weeks, they're probably just going to accuse each other of breaching trust again on this specific issue. So I personally think like these talks are going to get a little bit pointless as time drags on, and unless they just decide, hey, we're actually going to sign something today. But I don't see that happening just yet. And then like after a while, I do expect the markets to go down a little bit in reaction to that once they don't actually get any deals done. Remember, In the 60 days since he's made the 90-day agreement, he hasn't really signed an actual trade deal with any country yet. The UK is, I think, the only country that's even remotely close right now. And we already had a surplus with the UK, so we shouldn't have actually been in a war with them in the first place in terms of trade. However, the EU and China are proving to be much, much harder cookies to crack. And I don't really think much is actually being able to get done. I think China is going to be the toughest one, and they're not really going to agree to any concessions that the US actually wants. So that's the news for today. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe, hit that bell notifications button. Thank you, and have a nice day.